SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. If you're new to the podcast, first off, welcome. I am so glad you are here. If you're feeling good, head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to start receiving the AOE newsletter. It's a little piece of positivity from me to you every week. Returning listeners, thanks for tuning in again. You are awesome. Today is a throwback to Season 1. Dr. Katie Schweitzer and I had the chance to talk about the benefits of online education for students with special needs. If you're working online, you really want to hear this because it's going to change how you approach your work with students and how you think about the systems you have in place. Enjoy this encore episode and check back next week for an all-new one. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Thank you, Dr. Katie Schweitzer, for being here today, and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited that it's fall, start of a new school year. Also means the end of summer, which of course is a little sad, but is there anything you and your family do come fall just to kind of relax, have some fun?
So we like to drive through the gorge when the leaves start to change. It's so pretty. How about you guys?
We are all about outdoors, yes. I like going down to Hood River, picking apples, that kind of thing. Just got to get outside and do something.
It is pretty down there.
Yes, worth the drive for sure. Well, let's dive right into it today. We know many special education teachers are working online for the first time now and without a significant amount of training and how to do that effectively. So they are looking for actionable advice. When it comes to implementing IEPs, there are some accommodations that are rather common and others that are more nuanced. What accommodations are easy to translate from brick and mortar to online, and which ones kind of need more creativity in order to achieve?
So a lot of that is going to depend on the school and what tools and what curriculum they have available. So if you're in a school where, they've committed to purchasing canned curriculum, that can be a lot harder to manipulate. It can be harder to tailor to student needs. If you are in a setting where it's more teacher-created materials, or you just have more control over how you're able to alter materials, that can be a lot more malleable. Also, depending on the tech tools you have available, some tech has a lot more supports that are embedded in it. So when you're looking at things like text-to-speech, speech-to-text, Chrome extensions, things like that, that can be very easy to implement if you're using, say, Chromebooks. Others can be less accommodating. What I would really say to educators, administrators, and special education in this setting is to really think, rather than trying to replicate exactly what they were doing in the building in a virtual setting, to instead really focus on the areas of need. So looking specifically at the students' goals, deficits, etc., and then to look at the tools that are available and then to go from there.
That's really good advice. Yeah, seeing kind of the heart of what the need is and then how that translates in the online setting and with the tools they already have purchased or have at their disposal.
Right. And I think people, once you kind of free yourself of that mindset of we're going to try and do exactly what we were doing only online, and instead you kind of think about like what opportunities are available that maybe weren't in a brick and mortar, I think that's really the mindset you want to embrace. So if you think of somebody like maybe a struggling writer that had perhaps a scribe in the building, but you could use something as simple as a video submission in an online setting or speech to text. But these are some possibilities, these are some opportunities rather than restrictions because of the state that we're in right now with online education. Some parts, things that we've heard quite a bit this fall, people that are now choosing online education, in a charter school, say, rather than the resident district, is that based on their experience in the spring, they have seen some positives. So say a student that maybe struggled with peers in person, but can do well online once you've taken away that kind of physical piece. A lot of times students that come to virtual education by choice, in regular operation, the building itself had created a sensory issue, and that disappears in a home setting. So a lot of those things that can be triggers, that goes away once you kind of change that placement into the home. Others, extensive screen time can be problematic, and that's something that should be addressed if you're in a setting where you're really using a lot of live instruction, so like hours of screen time. That can be a problem for some students. I think the biggest part of the conversation, particularly when we're in regular operation, is really talking to the family and to try and find out what drew the student to online education in the first place. And that can really help uncover those needs that were maybe not being met or were a challenge for that building. And then it can also create additional conversations about what should it look like in this setting, what accommodations or modifications are needed, especially if the building component is removed.
Absolutely. I think, especially for kids and teachers for whom moving online wasn't a choice, it's really natural to mourn kind of the loss of all those benefits that come with being in person. And I love that you're bringing to light the advantages of being remote and being online, and thinking of all those assets that are now easily and readily available to teachers and kids alike. That just kind of makes me think too about the idea of less is more and quality over quantity. And, if being in front of a screen for 3 hours a day isn't going to work for a student, then why are we asking them to do that? Maybe we can pare it down. We can be more creative with what we have available as well. So I really like that kind of call to action to look at the assets, look at the positives of the change, and then use those, leverage all the new tools you do have available. I think that's really wise.
I do understand that there's a lot of districts that are kind of saying, this is how many hours we will do and things like that. But I think it's also worth, case by case, just like all special education, right, to really look at what can be done for that particular student and what are kind of the parameters and the constraints that are maybe being created and what can be kind of offset based on need. So I do think that's a bigger conversation right now as districts try and implement, a huge change, right? This is a major undertaking that I certainly respect the brick and mortars and the work that they're doing. But I do think as a special education department, really thinking student by student, here's what we can do, here's what we know we can't do, and then here's some opportunities for creativity and some opportunities for possible exceptions.
That really brings home the whole idea of an individual education plan or program, right? Like, this is for this exact and only this unique student. So I think you're right. And brick and mortar schools absolutely have more than their work cut out for them in figuring that out for each kid and within their systems too. So it is a big load to carry. Absolutely. What do you see, other than looking at the students as individuals and focusing on their individual needs and what the school can or can't provide and being honest with that, what else do you see as the essential ingredients for a school or a district to have in order to be successful with their online special ed program? And then do families also play a role in the program's success?
Yeah, I think a big one is to really look at kind of the philosophical foundation and framework for the service model, the identification, communication, etc., and really creating your systems around that. And again, I think this fall with this, this huge lift that districts are doing, this is a hard thing to do, to say you have all this work in front of you, but you know what, you really have to go back and look at kind of your framework and your philosophy, because I think everyone feels this push to get things done. But I do think it's worth taking a step back, because once you have that kind of firmly established, and if it can be very clearly woven into kind of everything that happens, so PD, decision making, implementation, etc., that's what you're going to fall back on, and that's what you can reference when you come to challenges or you come to decisions in the future. So again, that can be really difficult if you're in a large system, a large school, a large district, but it's not impossible. And it does take that time where you have to slow down in order to go fast and do that work first and then build from there. And that's really good for communication as well, because when you have meetings with families, especially families who are struggling or families who are having a hard time understanding, like, why am I in this setting? Why am I in this position? It's not a choice for everyone, obviously. it can make it much easier if you can fall back on these are our structures and this is why we feel like this is best for students in this circumstance. In an online setting, I think it's really important to communicate with families, again, kind of those advantages and those limitations. So in our environment, that can be something that we can do as soon as a family calls that wants to enroll, right? So that's the difference in a school of choice. So we can really explain, this is what it looks like in our system. This is why. These are some potential barriers. These are some potential hurdles once I've kind of heard your story and what we're working with here. And then that allows the family to make an educated decision. But in the circumstance of remote learning because of COVID, you don't have that kind of decision making on the part of the family. This is the option right now, but it can be an opportunity to explain what the services will look like and why, and the advantages and disadvantages of that setting, and that it's not a perfect fit for everyone. So in a school of choice, for example, we can do that, and we can talk about, if it's a good fit or not, and they can ask those questions to kind of determine as a family if it is. And while that's not necessarily an option in this remote learning environment for everybody, it is a chance to have that conversation of, let's work through these challenges proactively to try and find solutions before we get there.
SYS is an online management company that takes a different approach. We partner with schools to manage solutions. Whether you're a district adding an online option for students or an online school looking to go in a new direction, SYS Education can help make it exactly what you need it to be, with high-quality products at a fraction of the cost that schools pay to other companies. We are not just an educational consulting company. We are online educators ourselves and a tech team like no other. Let us help you bring your online school experience to the next level. Find out more at syseducation.org or by emailing info@syseducation.org. Set up your free consultation meeting to discuss how SYS might be able to help your school. Absolutely. It is important to make that distinction between a school of choice and students and parents who are choosing to move online and those who aren't. And I really like that you brought to light that idea of transparency and explaining why, because I think that's something very human that we all desire when we're up against a challenge or a change or something that we're not comfortable with. We just want to know, like, why is this happening, or why does it have to be done this way? And sometimes when parents ask us those questions, it actually challenges us to open up and think, okay, this is our structure, but we could do it this way and still stay within our structure, stay within our constraints, or no, we can't. This is what it is for now, And I really appreciate too that you said it's not a perfect fit for everyone. We know that brick and mortar isn't a perfect fit for everyone. Online isn't a perfect fit for everyone. So those who aren't choosing right now to be online but are finding themselves there is some consolation in knowing, like, okay, this is temporary. And if I can ask questions of my administrators or case managers, whoever it is, I can figure out at least why we're here and why it's being done this way. We can work from there, until we can change something else or make it feel like a better fit.
Well, and another piece that I think is really different, especially for those that are new to online education that, didn't necessarily choose it. One thing that's different, I think, on the staff end is, as an online school, when someone comes to us, and I can't speak for everybody, but that initial intake meeting is really important, because what we do is we really ask parents to tell us kind of their educational story or their journey, right? And it can really be helpful because we can hear what worked well and what didn't work well. And, we are going to build that into our plan. Another part that is really different for those of us that have been, in schools of choice and are online as regular operation is that you have to really rely heavily on that parent for input and for feedback, as well as the student, because you don't have that physical presence where you're able to observe and see what's going on. Have a limited amount of information. And right. I do think that's something to keep in mind for those that are, because of COVID have been thrown into this setting, is that really, we've had those meetings before where we're kind of explaining what we see in brick and mortar from a school team perspective. And this is what we see in the 7 hours a day that we have your child. And then the parent might have a very different perspective because they're not asking their child, to perform academic tasks or to do non-preferred activities for lengths of time. And so, you have that kind of cliche, like, well, he never does this at home. And then we're like, well, this is what we see. And you can kind of drive a wedge in a team. But I do think what that shift in perspective is right now, all of us who are doing remote learning, you have to rely on that parent input because you can't see it, you can't know. And so if they're reporting like extreme frustration or, this kind of assignment is so difficult for them. And then you have to take that and run with it and let it play a lot more into your plan than it typically would because you just don't have that observation piece that you used to have when you had them all day. And so they become a much more prominent team member in the school environment. They kind of become way more of the academic expert than typical because they are all of a sudden, whoever's working with that student all day on their schoolwork is the one that sees what it looks like, and that's not the teacher anymore.
Yes, it's such a role shift and a little bit of a power shift too that maybe some teachers or SPED case managers might be slightly uncomfortable with at first. I feel like I was at first when you feel like you're the educational expert on the team and you know the student or the file, and it's like we really have to put the parent and the child first and lean on them for all of that information and trust them. And when we let go of that control as special ed teachers and case managers, when we kind of let go of that a little bit and give that control to the families, I feel like the results are really positive, both for that home and school communication. It's much more of a open, collaborative team than it is when you just kind of see the parent a couple of times a year for an IEP meeting or a conference or something, and you're just sort of doing it yourself. Yeah. I think you've really hit on something that's at the heart, especially of the transition to online for a lot of people, is that home and school communication and trusting parents and believing what they're saying and taking it to heart and acting on it. Can you speak any more to how your online staff communicates with families, just tools they use or methods? How are they doing that? Are they calling everybody, emailing? What kind of things do they do?
So I think a lot of it depends on family preference, right? So you have some, even with families that select online education when things are regular, right? You have some families that are more tech savvy than others. And at the end of the day, you might have a family that just really wants that phone call. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think that the biggest part is just to ask, like, here's some ways we can communicate. What's the best way? And you might have some families that are like, well, this is a very transparent system. I can completely see what, my student has to do, what they have already turned in and what is still outstanding. And I will, let you know when I need more information. Or you have other ones that are like, I need to come to, whether it's an office hour or a help session or whatever, and really just ask you about these things. Or if it's like, I would like to email you, once a week or whatever it is. So one thing that we've seen in our school and that we've kind of laid as a part of that framework is that we have an expectation of responsiveness, and that's across the board for all, gen ed, special education, everybody, that we will really be responsive to family questions or concerns or whatever. And that, I think, prevents probably 90% of misunderstandings, miscommunications, frustrations, is just to even say, I don't know the answer right now, but I'll get it for you. So when we do initial intake meetings, we really set that up where we're like, this is how, this is school-wide communication, and then let's talk about how you need that communication piece. And then a little bit going back to kind of that increased role of the parent in academic support, some of the goals and things like that are going to rely on some feedback. So if you're working on something and it's something that we can't observe, and you even need to gather that from the parent, even for progress monitoring, you might set up a more standardized way of collecting that. So it might be a Google form. It might be something where, we're going to check in, at these set points and talk about what it looks like, this particular skill that we're working on, and you're supporting that at home. So I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do it. But I do think you have to listen and think really about accessibility for families. If you have someone who's just never going to check their email or is never going to log into a Canvas Observer account, and you know that, and then, you don't want them to be blindsided if things aren't going well. So I really think finding out what works for that family and really trying to accommodate the family as much as you can.
It's really honoring your clients, honoring those you're serving, and it's the kids and the parents. And I think that's really great advice to our teachers out there, is that you just need to listen to what they need and do your best to provide that and take care of yourself in the same time. And that expectation of responsiveness, I know for me as well, if I send someone an email, I have a question, as long as I get a response back in a timely manner, even if it is, I'm looking into this, I just need more time, that's great, because you feel heard and
Right.
you've been heard. And so, yeah, I think that goes a long way.
And one thing that's a little different in this setting, which is actually an advantage, I think, is, traditionally, if you were a special education teacher in a building and say, you're not just a case manager or a teacher, right? Typically, you're teaching all day, right? Lunch, teaching, maybe some prep in there somewhere, and then you start responding to families. One thing that is an advantage with online teaching is that you do have more time built into your day to communicate. I think that's probably true for everyone, and I'm not saying that the load is lightened in terms of preparation or, paperwork. All those things are always there. But just like with our students, there's a little more flexibility in the day. That's true for those that are teaching online often as well. And so some of that can be like small windows of time that are just dedicated to that communication throughout the day, rather than like a big chunk of time at the end of the day where you're frantically trying to catch up on emails. So I think that's an advantage in this setting, is just the flexibility of schedule, which obviously will vary setting to setting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is. I think it's one of the benefits I found to being an online teacher when I first started, was that flexibility in my schedule and not physically running around a building and always being 2 minutes late to every class or group because there was no time in between them. So yeah, thinking about that as an advantage. I can call this parent at 9 a.m. or I can call them at 3. I have this choice now. That's really powerful.
And, similar, this is true for kids as well. A lot of times we have kids that come to virtual school because the flexibility of the schedule is really attractive to the family. And we have a lot of students that honestly have kind of productivity windows, right? So you have some kids that are going to be very productive at 7 p.m., and that doesn't work in a building. You have kids that really struggle with sleep schedules, and so really don't start doing much until 10 a.m. That also doesn't work in a building. And I think that also, obviously I hope our teachers don't have disrupted sleep patterns, but we have a lot of teachers that wake up very early and do quite a bit in the morning, and that kind of offsets the rest of their day, and maybe they're done earlier. Or we have certain teachers that they're going to work later, and it just kind of removes the fact that it's not normal to be in a building at 4 a.m.
Right.
It's not atypical if you're an early riser to go and, do some things at 6, right? So it's just a different frame of mind that I think is true for adults and professionals and kids in this kind of different setting.
Yeah, again, it's seeing us as human, right? And everyone's uniquely human and doing their best work when it works for them. And yeah, having that flexibility and transparency around that too. Like, yeah, I understand you're going to do your homework at 7 at night. That's fine. I might respond to you at 6 a.m. because I'm not a night owl. I'm the morning person, that kind of thing. And that again is really honoring students for who they are too, and letting them work to their strengths in that kind of way. So that is a really huge advantage, and one that hopefully students and teachers alike take advantage of as best they can within their parameters. I know some of our teachers will want to know kind of like a takeaway, like what can I do tomorrow? What's something I can grab onto? Are there any small or like easily completed tasks that general ed and special ed teachers could complete right now to start better accommodating their students with special needs within their online courses or within their online content? Like, what tools should they really be reaching for today?
I think the first thing is to really take an inventory of what you have, and that is tech, that's curriculum, that's programs. And I think this is evolving, and it's worth digging into beyond just like, this is what we have. So like, for example, we have people that use Zoom for their live sessions. We have people that use Google Meets. There's a whole bunch of different settings. And right now, when we look at students who are hearing impaired, there's been this whole uptick in these platforms figuring out how to implement closed captioning that's very accurate, right? So even just beyond knowing what it is really looking at like, how have those designers looked at accessibility, particularly recently, now that everybody is using it, and this has really become like a big push, a big need. So really looking at not just what it is, but what kind of pieces are in there that can make them more accessible for students with different needs. And then I think to really go caseload by caseload and to figure out, this is how we were meeting that need before. What could that look like here? So I'm not going to remove it necessarily, and it doesn't always necessarily need to be amended, but what does it look like that's different, but we're still meeting that same need? And then really including the families in on that conversation and to really listen to what worked well in the spring and what did not. So kind of an advantage, disadvantage is right now you have a chunk of students that are experienced in online education now, and they've seen one version of it somewhere, and they've had challenges and they've had celebrations, and they are able to share that with you. And then you're really, if you can take that input, kind of like what we've been talking about, and then move forward from there. So you have a student that found out in May, this was really frustrating. So let's think about what we can do for the rest of this year, however long we're doing this, so that it doesn't continue to just be a constant source of frustration. And then, the flip side of that, you have a student that's like, this helped me a lot wherever I was, and then how to put that piece into play in whatever setting you have. And then I also think, considering like long-term, what tech accommodations are also going to serve students outside of a school setting? And if you kind of think about that, like what you use as an adult. So how often do you use speech to text to send a text, right?
Right.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
Who listens to audiobooks? A lot of people. Podcasts are an example. This is a non-text dependent medium. This is something that you don't necessarily need literacy to access. And then to think about, how do you incorporate those resources that students will likely see again, that they will use to be functioning adults, that they probably already use or already know, and how do you make that a part of their educational life?
And I mean, that's the goal, isn't it? Right? At the end of the day, we're not preparing them to be great students. We're preparing them to be great citizens of the world. And so to give them access and be honest about what we use ourselves as tools and to see them as such, as beneficial, and encourage their use of them, that's huge. That's really driving that 21st century lens right to the forefront of how we look at what we're doing. Is there anything that you've seen used that's been really successful that you would recommend?
I think what we saw kind of across the board in the spring is that the interaction and engagement is a huge piece. So when you look at ways to make it less like a lecture and more where the students are active participants in lessons, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, I think that's a really big piece. So for an example, our staff started using Pear Deck last spring, and it was across the board. I mean, everybody liked it, right? And so it really grew and became part of our planning. And Pear Deck is just like one small example. And then when you kind of look at the whole Google suite, right? We use that in our school, but it's also something that they will see in an office. I mean, no matter where they work, they're likely to see that one again. If they're going to head to any kind of post-secondary setting, they'll see it again. When you look at just simple things like Google Classroom or Canvas, they will see those things again, probably, whether it's in a workplace or it's in, a college. These are just tools that are very familiar.
And really meaningful. I think, that's really great advice, that you should be teaching students and using tools that they can leverage both in school and then out in the quote unquote real world and beyond too.
I do think too, kind of more people are picking up like, how do you have students engage with each other online, which I think is a big piece too. I know that's been something that's really dearly missed with a lot of people when they come online. They feel like their kids aren't learning, how to even have conversations with people in an adult way. So really setting up, whether it's breakout groups, discussion boards, that's a great way to teach students, how do you interact online in a respectful way and state your opinion and support it. I mean, so just kind of those things and thinking about what does that look like and how do we not just have students lose months and months of social skills while we, kind of at the same time focus on academics.
Right, because that's a huge part of a lot of students' IEPs too, is a social, emotional, behavioral, adaptive, those kinds of skills. And so there's still opportunities to engage those. Like you said, you could have a discussion. You can have a discussion where kids type responses or do video responses or both. And absolutely teaching them how to engage in discourse politely and communicate clearly, all of that. There are those small opportunities for connection and engagement outside of even just the in-class, online, live time, but that asynchronous time can also be leveraged to allow them to communicate with each other. And another thing I've seen is clubs. So online schools and districts trying to form some online clubs or groups, or even teachers just doing kind of like an office hours or a class celebration time, anything that just allows kids to have that extra outlet where they can be using their social skills and expressing themselves in a low stakes or no stakes kind of setting.
And one thing that's like a whole nother topic, so we don't have to even broach it, but one thing that has a lot of value when you think about those skills that transfer and that are likely applicable to all students, not just special education students, but to me, therein lies the power of whether it's co-teaching or even just co-planning. And you really look at some of those social emotional pieces or even just communication, and you talk about things like turn taking, things like that. And then you work with gen ed teachers about how to incorporate into all of their instruction, right? So it is tricky in a virtual setting to just do that work in, if you're doing a pull-out group with SPED students to work on like communication and things like that, that's very hard to do in isolation. It's very easy to do if it's a piece of your course that everybody's doing. So that, again, that's a big topic, but really kind of thinking at when you're looking at that caseload and there are those opportunities to just have it inclusive in general education, that's the best place for them to practice. It's as close to a classroom as you're going to get.
So true. I can't agree with you more. I could talk about inclusion for
we'll do another show for that one.
Yeah, we'll do that's a 5-part series. No. Oh my gosh. Katie, it has been such a pleasure talking with you today, and I really appreciate your insights and the way you've made me think more about parents, more about families, and putting them at the center of my conversations about kids with IEPs and kids with needs. So I really appreciate that, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being here.
I love it. It's always fun to talk about. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest from the past, Dr. Katie Schweitzer. I hope you enjoyed hearing Katie's guidance on specially designed instruction in online schools. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, at AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS Education, head to syseducation.org. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks again for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
listening.